You're listening to The Outcue, a 21 News journalist perspective on a top news story.
Good afternoon. I am Assistant News Director Justin Mitchell. It is Friday, August 9th, 2024, and this is The Outcue. So now we've covered lots of aspects of how we look into different kinds of stories and how the minute and a half that you see on TV is really maybe sometimes a day, sometimes a month's worth of work. What we haven't done yet, and you've heard from our videographers, but you haven't heard from an anchor yet about what goes into an anchor's day. And there's, I think, a cliche that you guys may think that an anchor's day is sitting there and reading the news. And man, if there is any cliche in news that couldn't be more wrong, that is it. And so with me today to talk about how wrong that is, is anchor extraordinaire and maybe the hardest working woman in Youngstown news. We've got Lindsay McCoy. And Lindsay, thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for that intro. Wow, you did a good job. I give you an A for effort.
Right.
Very good.
So obviously, I'm being a bit hyperbolic.
Yes, please.
I'm being hyperbolic to push back on a perception because there is a lot of what we do with this podcast. The whole point of this podcast is to sort of undo some of the misconceptions that people have about news. And some of the misconceptions are because sometimes they're true. There are outlets that don't do things the way we do, and they don't think the way we do. And so there are certainly anchors in the world who don't do that much. But that's a disservice to themselves, it's a disservice to the career, and it's a disservice to the audience. So what I want to talk about is how much an anchor really does when they're really, worth their salt. And, you've been doing this a long time now. How many years on Weekend Today?
I think 6 years on the weekend show here.
6 years on the weekend show, and then we're coming up on 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years for our baby, the 5 o'clock news, which is insane. 21 News at 5 is really young still. It's a young hour. It's its own newscast, its own world. I think I've been with WFMJ, the family here, since 2012.
Yeah.
So, and I always remember based on election cycles. So the second year Obama ran and won office is when I started. During that campaign, one of my first assignments, you sent me out to the polls. So.
I just remember you sitting in the little producer area on the day that you interviewed, and I think you'd probably been up in the studio with Mona and Sheila, and then we do our 12:30 meeting, and you came down and sat in on that, and I distinctly remember because you were weighing in on things. You had thoughts on stories, and I'm going, I don't know this person. Who is this?
Well, yeah, and I wanted to hang out. I thought, okay, maybe I could fit in here. So yeah, it's been a really fun ride so far, and it's still going. We are really full steam ahead every single day since the 5 started.
So let's talk about what those every single days are like, because the people at home, they see you at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
How many hours into your day are you by the time they get to see you?
I don't know if I want to answer that, but it is the last hour of my shift. So by the time the show comes around, I get done after the show's over, and that's where I have to bring all the energy, bring all the ammo, bring all the questions, be on point, because I've got to articulate, I've got to, execute not only the newscast elements, which would be the news blocks, and, make sure that I'm keeping a flow and a pace, but I'm also asking the questions, staying focused on the interviews, because that show, the 5 o'clock hour, we are really digging into several different stories, and they are the top stories of the day or the week of the moment. However we find them, it's what people are talking about. Whatever you're hearing about, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to dig into it. So that's the very tail end, if you can believe it. So the whole day gets started at 10:15 here at the station, but I'm up whenever my daughter wakes me, which is probably 7 or earlier. And I'm drinking coffee, reading the news, watching the news, doing her hair. Us working moms, we do it all. I don't know. I think I should slap Superwoman on my resume or title at some point. But no, it's really a fun activity in terms of, the routine. I like having routine. I'm a big routine person, and if I can live in it, I thrive in it. And so that's when we get started every morning at 10:15, and then we get started with those meetings. We set the tone. We figure out what we want to look into, and not one detail is usually overlooked because we are trying to figure out what are the questions that haven't been asked yet. What information do we need?
And we really see ourselves as in competition with no one and everyone all at once.
Yeah.
We stand alone.
Right.
No one in this market, or quite frankly, many markets, are doing a show quite like the 5 that we do. There's a lot of places that have a 5 o'clock news.
Right.
But it's more of a newswheel type of a
Yeah.
thing. This is a much more dynamic program that takes, like you mentioned, when you're up at 7 o'clock and you're reading the news and you're drinking coffee. That's when those cogs in your brain start turning.
Oh, yes.
And that all comes to inform questions that you're going to ask and people that you might want to talk to. And we're looking for who to talk to. And not that any of this is done without help. Obviously, it's a team effort.
Oh, for sure.
But
Oh, yeah.
all day long, I mean, you're up and down the stairs, you're talking to different people, and it's also the shifting of gears. You could be doing a heavy political interview, and in the same hour, you might be doing something that's more lifestyle or something medical or something, very rarely entertainment, but something that's just sort of in the zeitgeist, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's what makes the 5 great. I think it's like you're a very busy person, I'm a busy person, and then there's everyone else who has their jobs too in this world. We all are people. And at the end of the day, we go to work, go home, want to know what's happening. And so that hour, I want it to be where you get caught up on everything. And I'm checking all the boxes for you so that you don't have to go 50 different places if you don't want to, because you're going to get information and learn more, move forward, maybe with some other information in the community, maybe help you out. I like to help people. So if they're watching, I want them to, learn something, maybe, it helps them in their everyday life, like the health stuff. I get a lot out of that. I know a lot of people watching mention it too. And also just, consumer stuff, local events, what nonprofits are up to, what's the news. We're breaking news. We're pushing, people for answers and asking tough questions in some of these heavy hitting hard news segments, whether it's a politician or a local leader. If they can come on the show, that's another big hurdle that we can talk about. But if you're willing to take the questions, I'm going to ask them.
Well, so let's talk about that, because there's certainly there have been times where there have been leaders that we want on, and there's a way. Sometimes it might be somebody, a producer making a call or trying to see, or there might be somebody working on a web story and they say, hey, do you want to come on the 5? But there are a lot of times where that's you directly making that entreaty to them, because they need to know that they're going to deal with somebody who's going to know their stuff and is going to be fair, but is not going to pull any punches. And that's a reputation that you've got to build. So that's a skill in and of itself. I mean, talk about that and how it works to get people, but also how sometimes it makes people not want to do this.
I think it depends on the person on the other side of the phone as well. So when I run into people and I ask questions, whether I'm in the field or on the phone, you can kind of gauge by, how they receive you, if they even really want to talk to you. And I read that and I understand. It's not always the most fun activity to get interviewed on the news, or maybe you really like it. Depends on what job you're in and what role you have as a politician. Maybe you're a little nervous. There's all kinds of reasons. And so I definitely like to approach people right where they're at and say, hey, this is a big story and we need to talk about it. And the public deserves answers, also wants to know answers or needs information. A lot of times, some of these interviews are because we're having an issue, whether it's safety, we have power out right now because of the storms, flooding, ongoing issues in a community. People need to be informed. And you're losing a lot of those local options for getting news. We're, local TV, the last man standing, and we're asking a lot of those questions that people really are craving. And so for me, I just try to, just do the best I can to get them on the show, because I know it's going to do a good thing for the people on the other side of the screen. They deserve that. I feel like that's my role, is just to best serve them as possible. But I started, way long time ago, and I still have time in my career. I'm not, at the end or anything, but I started really early is what I'm getting at. And I think a lot of us did too, where I started in a newsroom while I was in college. I actually was interning right after my freshman year. I feel like I was raised in a newsroom by other reporters and mentors. And so I kind of lived in this element where I was always learning to report, how to ask the questions, how to get information. If people didn't want to give it to me, how am I going to get it? But then also the stories that we need to get and how do you get them? And so I became a reporter in Akron, and I then eventually became a full-time anchor at some point. I worked for AOL. So I've done, the radio, the web, the in-field reporting, and that was a great mix for me. And then when I came here, our retired news director, Mona Alexander, I remember interviewing with her, and she had a lot of questions, and she's like, let me write all this down, all the different things you've done. And I explained, my experience, and she took a chance on me because I wasn't from traditional TV news. Right. I was from radio. And that was like the old school way of getting into broadcast back in the day from, some of the folks I've worked with in the industry who are, retired or passed. I've worked with some legends, whether it's here or in Akron. And I feel really thankful that I got to have those experiences because I learned a lot from them. Anything they learned, they would tell me, and I would either write it down or not forget. Because I thought, well, they've done it. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'll just remember they said, this advice and keep it with me. And so when I came here, I reported, and Mona and you and Sheila all helped me develop my skills as a reporter. Because, that's what happens. You get into a newsroom, we all share ideas, and I needed to learn a little bit. I was still fresh. And switching from TV to radio was kind of a transition. Eventually things caught on faster than others. Kind of a different approach maybe because I had some skills, but I had to learn other ones, and applying them over was, just a little bit of a learning curve in some ways. But I spent years running a beat, asking questions, trying to find my own stories, digging for things that I thought might be there, following hunches, getting leads from people. And so all that combined, I think, helps you as a journalist, and then you can take those skills whenever you're trying to get interviews with people, talk to people. I don't know, being in the field though, what I find works best is just being real with people, we're all human. Yes. And people are going through like the worst time of their life sometimes when I'm at their front door, and I don't want to ruin their day, I don't want to make it worse. A lot of times I just want to help them if I can. If they want to say something and have something to be said about their loved one or situation, then I want to be that person to help them. If they don't want to talk, I understand too. I wouldn't sometimes want to either. So, that's part of doing the news, and that's years of working with individuals and then getting some of these people who don't want to talk. I think we're dealing with some transparency issues, folks that don't want to maybe give comment, they'll hide behind statements or emails, and I know the public notices it because they don't get the information they're looking for, and their questions are not only flooding our inboxes and our instant messenger places, you get the messages, they're everywhere. It's like you got 5 message places. How do you keep up with these messages? But they're on our Facebook comments too. They're out for everyone to look at.
They're everywhere.
So, while I understand people don't want to maybe talk sometimes, you got to push back, and that's what being a journalist is trying to get information for people.
Because what's lost in those statements that they issue is the follow-up question. The art of the follow-up question is crucial everywhere, and that kind of gets into this transition that I want to make where you've talked a lot about being out in the field. Now those skills are where you cut your teeth for how to be a good anchor, right, as opposed to, the caricature that people think it might be. Because you've got to listen actively and on the fly and live and pay attention. And if they've just said something and your next question is what they just said, then you look silly, they think you look silly, we look silly. You've got to be paying attention, and they may say something that you didn't even know or couldn't anticipate.
Correct.
And know what's important and seize on it. So I talk about how what you learned in the field is now applicable to what you do, and you still get out into the field sometimes.
And
we've done it a few times in the past couple of weeks. We've had that luxury, and that's been great. And by the way, just an absolute joy from an editorial perspective to we do a lot
it's fun.
Well, we do a lot of.
I like to get out.
We work with a lot of young reporters, and there's a lot of teaching, and there's a lot of, and every now and then, just somebody who knows how to do this, without needing as much oversight. It's a whole different perspective where you can read the script and go, "Oh man, that's it." And
I think that's just years, and you can't replace experience in time and life experience too. And with the reporters we have now, we've got a great mix. And I always say, everyone starts somewhere. I started somewhere, and someone was patient with me. And trust me, I got yelled at a lot. When I started, there were some things I said wrong. My parents would call and say, you pronounced that wrong. I'm like, thanks, Mom, thanks, Dad. And other reporters and anchors would put me in my place, but I learned. And every day and every week I thought, okay, what did I learn this week? What did I learn this month? What did I learn this year? And I would give myself like self-checks. But, to your point, though, with the questions and knowing how to do that live and get information, I think that you have to, yes, actively listen, but be prepared. And that's what the whole day of the 5 o'clock is.
Yes.
Is I'm researching probably 3 to 4 topics. Some of these interviews are maybe more heavy lifting research than others. Some of them are days. Some of them are a month. It just depends. And I have to be ready. And I was trained by a lot of great veteran journalists like, Mona. My last news director was at Esposito out of Akron. I also had a mentor, which comes into more of the anchoring with Virgil Dominic, who's a Cleveland legend. I mean, I couldn't have come across some of the best, last of the Mohican legends out there when it comes to developing these, real journalistic skills. And I had a professor in college, Carl and Eidsvåg. Some folks from Kent State might remember him. You have your question tree. If they go here, you go there. You have to be prepared. You have to anticipate. But also, I don't want someone on the other side of the screen sitting, in their chair watching the news or, maybe working in the kitchen like I'm doing or, cleaning up toys. To sit there and say, why didn't they ask that? If I have time, I'm going to ask everything that you probably were hoping I asked. And if I didn't, email me and let me know, because I won't forget.
Follow up, right.
For sure. There's time in the 5. That's the other cool thing, is that there's such an open canvas where I get to kind of be creative with the newsroom and all of our editors combined. Sheila gives me great confidence and, great feedback, positive feedback on what I'm doing. You do too with the questions when we're in our meeting together in the morning. And so, and you and I kind of have the same wavelengths sometimes. And Mona, the last news director, Alexander, we'd have, some of the same thoughts. And so when you're in those moments, you just have to be prepared and you know what you're doing. And that's, I think, what makes the 5 a magic hour for me, is that this was the great marriage of the morning show Lindsay everyone knew, mixed with the reporter Lindsay, and now I'm getting to do, the evening news, and I'm meeting a lot of new viewers for the first time. And it's nice because this is kind of where I hang out, in the zone as a parent. This is kind of the hour I watch news, so I feel like I fit right in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, another aspect of anchoring that that I think that people don't, I guess you realize it, but you don't think enough about it, is that you really got to be so meticulous in ways that the viewers don't think about unless they see a little mistake. A little mistake. You ever tripped over a word in your day-to-day life? Well, if it happens during that magic hour, it's like a credibility hit to the whole organization. And no, it isn't. It's just a word somebody stumbled over. Yeah. But that's something that is always weighing on you while it can't completely weigh, can't distract you. You just have to be that prepared, right?
Right, yeah. And the day, like I said, it's so much chaos that you almost have to take a few minutes before any show as an anchor and just kind of calm yourself down. Make sure you are familiar with your show ahead, the scripts, what's coming up, and just be prepared for what is coming your way. But don't let the moment control you. You need to learn how to control that moment with yourself. So my advice for any anchor, or really anyone in news that wants to do live, because live is tough. This is more relaxed setting. This is the future too. We're on social media, we're on YouTube, we're everywhere. We're a little more, off the cuff. Whereas there, it just depends on where you're at. Know your audience, know your hour, know your time slot if you're a half hour, because that dictates kind of the style you're going to do too. And that's tough.
And the content does too, because that's another thing, is that it's not just like, we're talking a lot about the interviews,
right?
But you also have to know, at least to some extent, what everybody's story is, and what all the stories that are not necessarily assigned to a reporter, but there's just maybe a producer wrote, maybe, you've got to know all this stuff inside and out, because they require a certain tone. The viewers trust you, and if you get that tone wrong, you could come off flippant, you could come off, you could come off dramatic, there's a lot of subtleties that if you don't get just right, and they never think, if you get it right, they'll never notice it, and that's the key, right?
Yeah, and you don't want people to think that it's really also like, I don't know how to explain, maybe
performative. You don't want it to be performative.
I don't want people to get that vibe, and I'm not going to, because by the end of the day, I need a Diet Coke or a coffee, and then I get some energy going. No, but it's really a thing where doing the news in my mind is I'm doing the news, okay, and I'm going to tell you the news. Yes. Whereas when I used to do dance as I was younger, I come from a ballet background, long ballet background, where I did technical ballet through almost to high school. Then I went on to cheerleading and then did some gymnastics and coached gymnastics and cheerleading after high school into college and did some dance teams. So I've got a really big background in performing arts. And so I was used to being in front of people. That's the one thing is you got to be comfortable. You got to be like, hey, what's going on? I see a screen here and I'm not afraid. That takes some time to wear off. But if you're in front of a lot of people versus a camera, that can kind of have some differences too. I imagine 1 or 2 people, not a whole crowd. But it kind of gets some of the nerves off. You can't be nervous. You just got to kind of be yourself. And that's the biggest tip I got from a lot of these, mentors that I've had in the past is just be you. Don't try to not be you. Warm your voice up. Got to take care of your voice. I think I've talked to you a lot about I need like cough drops all the time or tea sometimes, depending on the time of year. You can really do a doozy on your vocals. And I've, in the past, if anchors are starting out, I do recommend a voice coach so that you can kind of learn your voice and how you can warm it up and then use it effectively. Also, when you're reading your scripts, where do you emphasize pronouncing words and diction, just depending, if you have a southern accent or something. Some places will make you get rid of it. Nowadays, I don't think I see that anymore, but back in the day when I was in college, which isn't that long ago, long enough, that, those things came up. And so I made sure I had a voice coach, especially with radio being where I started. All the emphasis was on the voice. Whereas here, you guys see, you look at people every day. You have the face and the voice. So that was 2 things I had to kind of figure out. And, you just get used to one style over another.
And also, I would just, from my perspective, and obviously I've never been an anchor. I'm a behind the scenes guy primarily, other than, this. And, but is that the big difference between an anchor that I trust and an anchor that I'll never trust again is it's apparent you can't really fake caring. If you try to fake it, it's obvious. I remember a story, and it was a local story, and it was a big deal local story that was it was a sad one, it was a bad story, and I saw an anchor on another station, and I won't name them, but they obviously weren't here, but they cut back to them before they realized they were on, and they were laughing. And then they immediately stopped the laugh. They were joking around with each other. Now listen, people do that even in dark times, but you better make sure you never make the audience think that you're faking it. And I'll never look at that particular anchor again the same way, because I think they fake it because of that.
Well, and we don't want to point fingers. I just think in general, I understand. I see, sometimes you see on the national level a little bit, but I just think that if it's not you, it could be someone you know.
Right.
It could happen to you. You could easily be in the same spot as someone that you're interviewing or talking about. I don't know. I just make sure that I approach it as if, if they were trusting me with their personal information, and just be very careful and gentle. Because a lot of times we're talking about people who have lost children. That's awful. We've talked about people, like I said, at their worst times, their home flooded, a tornado fell on their house, a fire came through, a murder took place. This is real life serious stuff that it's really sad that we have to talk about. But if we're gonna do it, we better handle it with care. They deserve that, and the victims really deserve that if they are not here anymore, or if they've been injured or miscared for. A lot of those kinds of stories that I've reported on in the past involved a lot of this. The opioid epidemic, one of them. I've been very passionate about doing a good job covering that, because not just now, but I see down the road a lot of these families, these children where the grandparents or even one parent is raising the kid, or they're in foster care. These children, we have a generation of children who have seen things that made them grow up way too early. And I just want to make sure that no matter what I'm doing it the right way. And that's what every anchor really needs to do. I've gone a step further and volunteered in our community and joined a nonprofit group. And if anyone asks me to come speak at an event or MC or help, I will do that. If I'm allowed to do that, the station says yes or no, I'll be like, yeah, I'll definitely go. Sure, why not? If I can do it in my schedule. And maybe that's the thing, is you got to care. I do care about the
Yeah.
community.
I think that really is it. Like you
Yeah.
mentioned the opioid epidemic, and what I don't think a lot of people at home know is that when that really started to hit home in such a way that it became something that was touching virtually every family, we, along with partners with a couple other organizations, arranged a series of community meetings that were not for the public's consumption. It was for us to meet and talk to people
Yeah.
that we otherwise may not get to, which brings me to really my final point, which is that a lot of what we do is telling you, but it's really listening. You listen. You
Yeah.
get to know that like everybody's a little different, and in some ways everybody's the same.
Right.
And you know that by listening, right?
Yeah, and you have to just be open-minded. You don't know where the story's going to go or what people are going to say or, what the next story could be. And I don't think, just they always say in school, never assume. Do not assume anything. Libels drilled into you, slander, all of that. You learn media law, you learn to vet your stories line by line. I'm going through that newscast every single day. And I'm going through every single story, every line. Not just so that I know what's coming up, but I may make some changes, make sure I can pronounce things or make it flow. There's a lot of to do with pacing too, and just making sure I can get that on as a clean show. And I know myself how I speak. And the fives, like I said, it's not necessarily like the 6 o'clock news. That's more like your quick, this is the top story, boom, 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 fast-paced sports, weather, everything. The 5, we have some time to breathe. And we bring in the team too. And that's so important because this is a team effort. This hour is not just about one person or 2 people on camera. This is the whole team. And without the team, this would not happen, from behind the scenes with the editors to the photographers to the reporters to me getting it on there clean with the producers and the directors. Every single person, it's like magic. And you feel it when you're doing it. You're like, wow, we have something special here. And so when I was doing the weekend morning show, I felt that vibe too. And I thought, wow, this is such an amazing opportunity. I was shocked when the 5 o'clock came and how it fit naturally into what I knew I could do if I could do it. We could dream up some other concepts. And that's the thing is, like, with being an anchor, the anchor of now is not what the anchor of yesterday was. You need to be ready to do all of it. Be a reporter, be a journalist, fact check, do social media, and understand how to do all of that at one time. Research, make sure you know your facts, be ready for big interviews. I mean, this is not where people are getting you coffee and telling you everything to say. I don't know when that was, but that's not anymore. And if you want to be in the news, that's great. I still think the best anchors, I agree with some of my mentors, are the best reporters.
Yes.
The best reporters out there make some of the best anchors you'll ever see because they understand what all their colleagues are going through and some of the questions that might even still be lingering in some of these questions and
the best
stories.
anchors are news people, not TV people. TV is, just the medium we use, but you can gather news, you could deliver news however, I mean, you are not just a TV person.
No.
Derek, Madison, Aaron, they're not just TV people.
No, they have stories they're working on in a different format. So, not everybody is the same breakdown of duties. Just because you see one person, they've got other duties when they're not on air.
And we worked with, we had the privilege of working with Bob Black for years. And let me tell you, the Bob that you all remember was that guy, and he was a lot of other things too.
True.
He was like a fundamental, though, he was a newsman's newsman, not just a guy who had that voice of God and sounded good on TV.
Right, and I think technology, the way we do news now, where you can be in the field and you're nimble with all kinds of new gadgets and social media platforms and editing platforms, that just gives us more tools to work with. When you don't see someone like Derek during the other 2 shows, he might be working on a story. Madison working all day on her story for 6, and it goes on and on and on. The morning show folks are working on feature reports, and they're always busy and sipping coffee. I don't miss that part of the morning. I like sleeping in now. I've gotten really used to it really fast.
But listen, your sleeping in is still, they're not their sleeping in is.
Right. Well, and it's fun.
Listen, Lindsay, this has been illuminating. Is there anything else you want to add that you just think that people might not quite understand before we wrap here?
Well, and I think anyone watching that wants to do news may want to know, if you want to do this, You just have to kind of work on every category at once. It's not going to be a one size fits all, just go to school. You need to have mentors. I'm thankful for all of my mentors, and without them, I wouldn't be here right now. And, they always said, just be yourself, because no one else can be what you are, who you are. Just do you. And don't, like my professor said, become a stenographer of the status quo. He would say it over and over again. You don't just hold a microphone and let them talk. Get the questions, push them. If not, ask them why not. I mean, you can't stop fighting for information. And, we want to have a good time here too. So I think we kind of create the best package all in one here on 21. And that's really cool in a local market. Like I said, you said, you don't see that everywhere.
You don't. If there's anything else that you want to see,
let
or,
us know.
let us know. And as I always wrap this up, is that you can always reach us at 330-744-8821. You can email us at news@wfmj.com, watchdog@wfmj.com. You can send us Facebook messages. There's any number of ways to reach us, and we are always receptive. And if you don't hear back from us, I can promise you we're looking into it. We're trying to do something. If it goes nowhere, it may go nowhere, but trust that we're always looking into it. And with that, we will see you next week, barring any major construction issues up here, right? We're undergoing some
looks
changes.
Really nice.
that aren't ready.
I like your set. Yeah.
So until next week, this has been The Outcue.